Hi, this is David at Mash IT. Now, as we've got in the latest and greatest slim and light gaming laptops from both Razer and Alienware at the moment, we thought why not put them head to head and see what you're getting for your money for both of these machines. So on the left here, we've got the Razer Blade 14 that's recently been released by Razer. Now this is the 14-inch slim and light gaming laptop with a Ryzen processor and RTX graphics card. And on the right, we've got the new Alienware X15, which is Alienware's new slim and light entry for the 15-inch market. And this has the RTX 3000 series cards and the 11th gen Intel CPUs. So what we've got going on here is there's a 14-inch versus a 15-inch and a Ryzen versus a new 11th gen Intel. So let's take a quick look around these chassis. Now, obviously there's an inch difference in screen size, but it's actually just over an inch because we're talking a 14-inch versus a 15.6-inch laptop. But Razers are particularly compact because they don't have any excess rear. Like on the Alienware here, you can see you've got the fans pumping all this out of this rear vent. And this rear vent adds an extra inch or so to the actual depth of the laptop. So if we look at these side by side, although there's only just over an inch in screen size, we're talking quite a big difference in footprint. So although these are both slim and light laptops, if portability is your concern, looking at the difference here, there's a massive difference in size of the actual overall footprint between these two machines, even though you're only talking an inch of an actual laptop screen. Let's spin it round and look at them side by side. Now again, you can see quite a difference here in the actual depth of the laptop. And then lastly, let's take a quick look at the actual height of these laptops together. So running my hands over across both of these, you probably won't be able to see very well with the camera. They're actually very, very close in size, with the Alienware being half a mil taller than the Razer Blade. It's really insignificant, you're probably not even going to notice. So both of these are very compact for their relative size, but Razer, as always, produces the most compact chassis. Now normally when you're talking about the 15-inch versus the 15-inch with the Razer and the Alienware, if they're both Intel, this gives the actual Alienware a massive advantage over the Razer Blade because it has a much higher power budget. But what Razer have done this year is with this 14-inch, they've included the new 7nm Ryzen processor. So being slim and light, you're still packing a really powerful CPU under the hood. And we will look at that further in detail when we get to the actual benchmarks. So let's have a quick look at the ports. We'll have a quick look at the Razer first, in case you haven't seen the Razer review. Ports are on both sides of this laptop, which is nice. This makes it nice and easy to use this machine. With a Razer power connector, a USB 3.1, a USB-C, because bear in mind this is Ryzen, we've got no Thunderbolt, so just USB-C, and a headset jack. Spinning the laptop round, we've got another USB-C, another USB 3.1, an HDMI 2.1, which is great, the latest HDMI port, and Kensington lock. And that's it. Now in comparison with the Alienware, on the sides, we've got a power jack on this side, and if we spin it around to the other side, we've got a headset jack. That's it on the sides of the machine. Now this is something that bugs me a little bit about these new X series, because I'm often plugging my memory cards in. I've got to constantly look to the back of the machine and lean over to plug these devices in. At the back we've got one USB 3.1, a Thunderbolt 4 port, a micro SD card slot, and a USB-C with power delivery, and an HDMI 2.1 slot. So a good range of ports on this machine, and Thunderbolt 4 also makes it very versatile. But what I dislike about this X15 is the fact we've only got one USB 3.1. Now if you're buying a gaming laptop, whether it's a slim and light or just an ordinary gaming laptop, the things you're probably going to be plugging in is a mouse, maybe a keyboard, and maybe a headset, like a USB headset. So with just one USB 3.1, you're going to be making sacrifices with this laptop as to what you're going to be able to plug in, or you're going to be needing docks and dongles. And talking about dongles, in the box you do get a USB-C to RJ45. Now that is a nice addition, because if you are going to be using this laptop for gaming, a lot of people want to be using RJ45 for the fastest throughput, and you do have that option with that adapter that comes in the box. No such luck with the Razer Blade. Both these machines, they're both very sturdy, very solid, good construction. You can open them both with one hand. As you can see, both these machines have Windows Hello, which is really nice. So open up these machines, straight away, they both look brilliant. Both look their classic Razer design here and the classic Alienware design on the right. When it comes to the touchpad, Although they both feel great with good gestures, the Razer Blade wins this one hands down just because of the size. It's such a massive touchpad you get with this Razer Blade. Very responsive, and you know, if I'm using this on my lap, I love this touchpad. On the X15, the touchpad feels great, it tracks well, it's glass, it's responsive, but they've made it quite narrow. And although it works fine, I would have preferred a slightly larger trackpad on this model, but what they've done is they've got a lot of venting at the top and had to shift this keyboard down, therefore making this a little bit smaller. So moving up to the keyboards, I'm going to talk about the typing experience first, and the win goes to the Alienware X15. It's got a lovely, satisfying, crisp typing experience. It's really great. The keys feel brilliant, as the last few generations of Alienwares have felt. The Razer Blade feels a lot mushier, it's a lot less travel, and it's just not a nice feeling keyboard to type on. You do get used to it. It's fine to type on, but if you type on both these side by side, most people gravitate to typing on the X15. But when it comes to the layout, I'm going to give the win to the actual Razer Blade 14, because the actual keyboard layout, in my opinion, is better with the, I know you've got the shortened cursor keys to fit this in under the shift, but in my opinion it's a better solution than having the full size cursor keys but moving the shift across and putting the up cursor where the shift should be. Also, both of these have got lovely RGB backlight, that's per key RGB, but the lighting is better on the Razer Blade 14, it's brighter and crisper. The X15, by contrast, you get two options of either dim or max brightness, and this is the max brightness. With the Razer Blade 14, you can go through a lot of stages of brightness to fine tune it to how you want it. Now with both of these keyboards, the secondary functions are not backlit, which is a shame. If you are in the United States, then you do get your secondary functions backlit, but obviously in Europe, we don't, which is a real shame. And with Alienware, nobody gets secondary functions backlit with this new keyboard. Now with the actual configurations of both of these laptops, this being Ryzen, as I say, it's got the new 5900HX CPU, which is like one of the most powerful notebook Ryzen CPUs you can get, and this is quite incredible, although I don't know quite why they put that in a 14-inch laptop. Whereas on the Alienware, you get a choice of the 11800H, which is an 11th gen Intel CPU, or you can upgrade it to the 11900H. When you're buying these and configuring these, obviously you don't get a choice with the Razer, but with the Alienware, I would just pick up the 11800H and save yourself some money. These chassis can't cope with the higher end CPUs. You're not getting much extra performance at all for the extra money you're spending on it. And with regards to the GPUs for both these machines, you can configure either with a 3060, a 3070 or a 3080. But because they're slim and light, the Razer has a maximum budget of 100 watts. The Alienware, if you buy the 3060, you get a 90 watt GPU, whereas if you buy a 3070 or 3080, you get 110 watt GPU. So there's an extra 10 watts in the Alienware chassis over the Razer Blade. But that 10 watts is not going to make a vast amount of difference in the actual gaming performance. And moving up to the screens, both of these models come with two choices, either a 1080p or a QHD screen. Now, if you decide on either of these laptops, my recommendation to you would definitely get the QHD screen, because on both of them, the Full HD screen is okay at best. On the Razer, the 1080p model that comes with the 3060 is quite a slow panel, and on the Alienware, the 1080p, which we've got here, is very average compared to the QHD model, which gets you G-Sync, Advanced Optimus, and has much higher brightness. Now, another thing with both of these machines, every model that you get comes with the option of Windows Hello built in, and that is great. I do love Windows Hello. This is a test of the webcam and the microphones on the Razer Blade 14. So this is a test of the webcam and the microphones on the Alienware X15 gaming laptop. Right, so we're going to do a quick audio test on these speakers of these laptops. I'm going to start with the Blade 14, and we're at 40% volume on both of these laptops. Now the X15. Now we're going to try the Blade 14 at 60%. And now the X15 at 60%. Gary and I have just been listening to these two, and they both sound pretty similar, but I have to be honest, the Blade 14 is slightly less tinny than the X15. So my pick between these two sets of speakers would be the Blade 14, but neither are going to blow you away. So we're running Cinebench R23 on the Alienware 15. It's set to performance mode, so the fans are a bit louder than they're on balance mode, but we're going to get better performance on the system. Now I'm running throttle stop on here as well, so we can see the sort of the temperatures and the speeds we're getting on the CPU. Now in performance mode, this 11,800, when it's fully loaded on this 15, we're pulling about 67 to 69 watts, and that's coming in at about 3.7 to 3.8 gigahertz. Not as fast as the Alienware X17 we've previously reviewed with a slightly better cooling solution than this, but you've got to bear in mind this is a slim and light. So what I'm going to do now is the fans are spun up to, I think, as far as they will, so we're going to check the fan noise. So that's 50 decibels, and this is on pure CPU load on performance mode. It would be quieter if we put it on balance mode, but I want to get the most out of this system in this R23, which is quite a vigorous test. Now we're going to come back again in a second, because obviously this is about a 10-minute test, and we're going to see what it's like at the end and what the score is. Right, so we're nearing the end of the test. The fans have stayed about 50 decibels throughout this entire test. You can see here, looking at the temperatures, the CPU is sitting in the sort of late 80s to 90s. Actually, I've even got one core right up into the late 90s. But it's stable, it's not throttling back. We're still at our 3.8 gigahertz here. Now I'm going to just quickly use my temperature gauge on the keyboard. So in the middle of the keyboard, we're getting up to about 39 degrees, which is quite warm. But if I put it on the WASD keys, we're dropping down to about 34. That's quite comfortable. Now if we go above the keyboard itself, we're talking 47 degrees. Well, late 46, 46.5. Okay, so yeah, if we put it at the top of the keyboard, we're talking about up to 47 degrees. So this is quite comfortable, really. You know, you can keep your hand on this keyboard, and that's not too bad. Cinebench is now finished, and we've got a score of 11,847 points. Pretty good performance. Obviously, these 11th gen CPUs are pretty pokey compared to the 10th gen. So we're now doing the same Cinebench R23 test on the Blade 14. We've turned the Synapse to the CPU on boost mode, so it's on the most powerful mode that it's got. The fans are roaring away. So first we're going to quickly just test the fan noise. So 54 decibels. So about 4 decibels higher than the X15. So this is obviously the joys of this little chassis here. But the good news is the actual CPU clock, so I don't know if you can see it, it's very tiny. It's just under 4 gigahertz. So this Ryzen is running all 8 of this cores, all 16 threads, at just under 4 gigahertz. So that's really impressive. It's pulling about 59 watts at the moment. The CPU is 100 degrees C, which unfortunately seems to be quite a norm on this model in boost mode on the CPU. And the AMD is rated up to 105 degrees centigrade. So, you know, obviously Razer and AMD think it's okay to be running at this. What I'm going to do is, this is a 10-minute test. I'm going to come back again in a second. We're going to check the temperatures on the chassis, and we're going to see what the score comes in at. Okay, so we're nearing the end of the test. It's throttled back a little bit. So just under the 4 gigahertz we were hitting, we're now getting to 3.9 gigahertz. So only 100 megahertz we've lost, which is really impressive for this 14-inch chassis. Now I'm going to just quickly test the temperatures. So this is the WASD keys. 26 degrees, really nice and cool, better than the X15 there. As we move to the middle of the keyboard, it's up to 39.6, so that's quite hot, but you know, you could still type, wouldn't be that uncomfortable. And on the right hand side, back down to 29 degrees again. And if I move to the top of just above the keyboard where the hot air is venting out, we've got a hot spot of 39 degrees. So that's not too bad, although it would get hot if we were using the GPU at the same time. We'll have a look at that in a second. And there we have it. We've got a final score of 12,359 points. So that's actually beating the Intel 11th Gen 11800H in a bigger chassis with 4 fans and vapor chamber cooling. So really impressive job for this tiny little 14-inch laptop here. Really impressive. Okay, so we're going to simulate some really heavy gaming here. So what we're basically doing is we're running Unigine Valley at its maximum settings, and we're also running Cinebench R23 with four cores selected. That is so that we can obviously keep this running for quite some time and keep the load on both the GPU and the CPU. Now, in order for it to perform anywhere near how it should be, we've had to put it on maximum fans in Alienware Command Center. And it did run flat out for a little while, but even at maximum fans, it couldn't cope with both the CPU and the GPU maxed out, and it's throttled it back. So we've been running now for about 8 or 9 minutes, and what we're basically getting is 70 odd degrees on the GPU, and we're getting about 90 watts, but which is what it's rated for, so that's not so bad. But the CPU, hasn't been able to cope. So it went all the way up to 100 degrees, and then it's throttled back. So when we're at 100 degrees, it was pulling 50 watts, and it's now throttled us back to about 30 to 35 watts, and our clock speed obviously has dropped from 4 gigahertz to about 3.5 gigahertz. So it's a bit of a shame that this cooling solution can't fully cope with the CPU and the GPU maxed out. But the good thing is, it isn't too hot on the keyboard. So let's take a quick look. So fan noise. Just over 55 decibels. And let's have a look at the keyboard. So we've got 33 degrees on the WASD. 38 in the middle of the keyboard, 39, sorry, went up to 39. And off to 35 on the right hand side of the keyboard. If we get some readings just above where it's pumping the heat out, wow, 54 degrees. That is incredibly hot. I would not want to be touching my hands on there for very long. Yeah, so the centre, near the vent, we're hitting 55 degrees centigrade. So you put your hands there, that is too hot to keep your hand there for very long. That's very hot. If I just quickly feel underneath, yeah, it's hot at the back rear as well, but the front and the sides, it's not too bad. But that rear, underneath the hot spot on the top, is also really hot on the bottom. Right, so let's now test this on the Blade 14. Okay, so running the same test now on the Blade 14. Now in Synapse, we've got this on the boost mode, so we're running on the highest GPU and the highest CPU settings available within Synapse. And we're running Unigine Valley to stress the GPU, and again we're running the Cinebench R23 with 4 CPU cores stressed. So this is like a realistic heavy game load. Now as you can see, looking at the RivaTuner stats on the actual screen, the CPU is up to 101 centigrade, so these do run really hot. But although it is running very hot, it's not throttling back. You can see we're using about 50 old watts on this AMD Ryzen 5900HX CPU. The GPUs are quite comfortable, 69-70 degrees, pulling just over 90 watts on this Valley benchmark. So this is quite representative of real-world gaming, sort of like a heavier game like Battlefield 5 or, you know, Call of Duty Warfare that's really stressing your laptop. So that's 54.5 decibels with this fully loaded test. So pretty much the same as when the CPU on its own was fully loaded in this highest profile. Now bear in mind, you don't have to run it in this highest. This is obviously just to prove a point with this laptop. This is the absolute best performance you can get from this machine and the most power you can pull from it. If you put it in balance mode, it will run cooler and it won't get as loud on the fan. But, you know, this is obviously the worst case. We're going to quickly test the heat on the machine now. On the right side of the keyboard, we're talking about 26 degrees. As we get to the middle of the keyboard, where obviously I'm guessing the GPU or the CPU is under here, 45 degrees. Now this is pretty hot for a keyboard. If I touch that, that's really warm. I wouldn't want to be keeping my hand there for a long time. You can get some seriously sweaty fingers there. As I get to the WASD keys, it's only 30 degrees. So when you've got your hand when you're gaming, that's actually quite comfortable. I could keep my hand gaming here for quite a while and you can't even feel any heat. That's quite impressive. So there's no problems there when you're gaming. Now just above the keyboard, like the hottest part, we're talking 46 degrees. You're not going to keep your finger on this aluminium because that is hot to the touch. Now underneath the laptop, it's a bit warm in the middle, but it's not that bad compared to other gaming laptops I've had. I wouldn't want to be putting this on my lap whilst gaming full tilt like this. But I think if you were doing some light gaming on balance mode, you could probably get away with it if you wanted to. Well, that's really surprised me. I would have thought on gaming with a much bigger chassis, obviously they've both got vapor chamber cooling, but I would have thought that the 15 would have destroyed the Blade 14 with regards to its thermal output. You've got the rear vents pumping all the heat out, 4 fans. This should beat the Blade 14 easily. Yet when I'm actually running the tests, this was able to hold the full CPU and GPU load that I placed on it, which is the equivalent of a heavy game that we were playing on it, whereas the X15 just couldn't keep up with it. It actually had to throttle back the CPU. Real shame there. I don't know if that's due to the Alienware cooling solution or whether it's just that the Ryzen processor is much more efficient, but either way, this wins out for sustained gaming performance. So we're going to test their performance on battery life for both of these machines. Because they're slim and light, you're quite likely to be using these both on battery. So both of these have been set to better performance on the battery setting, and we're running Geekbench 5. We're going to try the CPU and then the GPU. Alright, so the X51 is finished already. Now looking at the scores straight away, you can see it's running as well on battery as it does on mains. Okay, a little bit later, we can see that the Razer Blade 14 has been massively throttled. Single core of 896, that's really quite low. And the multi-core score of 5,400, that's actually not too bad. It's about the single core, that's going to be noticeable. If you're like launching apps, loading web pages, this is going to be sluggish. Now, although we've got a 3070 and a 3060, I am going to run the GPU test just to see how much they've throttled them on battery. So the 3070 should score more than the 3060 anyway, but we'll have a quick look. So the X15 has finished first again, which is quite surprising because it's only got the 3060 in it. And we've got 74,540, so that's actually not a bad result considering we're on battery. Now the Razer Blade 14, wow, this is impressive. Okay, the Razer Blade 14 has been massively throttled on battery, and we've got a score, an OpenCL score of 32,642 from that 3070. That is really poor. So straight away you can see that this X15 massively wins on performance on battery. So if you want to maybe game on battery, or you're doing some heavy work on the battery, admittedly it may not last that long because obviously you will burn through the battery, but at least you get some decent performance while you do it. The Blade 14, although we know the battery lasts a lot longer, you get much, much worse performance whilst you're actually on battery. That's really quite poor. Now both of these laptops being slim and light, upgradability isn't either their strong suits. With regards to the Razer Blade 14, the only thing you can upgrade is the one M.2 SSD. As it comes with a terabyte as standard, you'll be spending maybe a fortune on a 2 or 4 terabyte in the future if you wish to upgrade. Now with the Alienware, you do get 2 M.2 SSDs, which is quite nice. So you can get it in with a 512 or 1 terabyte, and then add another terabyte later if you wish. Both these are easy to get into. But unfortunately, both these being slim and light have the RAM soldered on. So when you buy the Alienware, you get the option to configure either 16 or 32 gigabytes. But with the Razer Blade, you are absolutely stuck at 16 gigabytes. There's no option to configure it any higher. With regards to battery life on both these models, this is where Ryzen's 7nm processor really sort of pulls ahead here. I was getting easily a good 10 hours with a little bit of tweaking, so turning off the backlight, putting it on 60 Hz on the display, and then a good 10 hours streaming YouTube over Wi-Fi at 50% brightness. That's a really good result, and that's with this QHD panel as well. Now with the 11th gen processors, that's big improvements over the 10th gen, but it's still not quite there with battery life. Getting about sort of just over 7 hours on the 15-inch, which is still not bad for the Alienwares. The 17-inch is much worse, but not quite in the same league as the Razer Blade. But when we talk about power adapters, Alienware have redesigned the power adapter now. We have this new 240 watt PSU. It is much more compact than it used to be, and it is a much nicer power adapter. The Razer Blade 14 gets the same 230 watt that you also get with the Blade 15 or 17, and this is quite a big heavy adapter, especially for a tiny little 14-inch laptop like this. So I want to just quickly weigh these power adapters, just to show you the difference here. So firstly, the Alienware. So that's 1 pound, 4.6 ounces, or 586 grams. And the Razer Blade, 662 grams, 1 pound, 7.3 ounces. So you can see that that Razer Blade power supply is not only bigger, it's heavier as well. And lastly, when you're looking at these two together, you've got a braided cable on the Razer Blade, and it does make this quite unwieldy. And you've also got, it's a proprietary connector, which is quite, It fits in nicely to the laptop, but it's not the easiest cable to plug in and use. Whereas this is the tried and true sort of barrel plug that you get with the Alienware they've been using for years. Not only is it very easy to plug into the laptop, but this is cross-compatible with other Alienware models, so you can get any old Alienware 240 watt or 330 watt adapter and plug it into this laptop and you're away. And they're really cheap on eBay, so that's quite a nice feature for the Alienware. Also, both these laptops have power delivery, so if you don't have your big chunky power adapter with you, you can plug in a USB-C power adapter and carry on working, but you won't get full performance on the USB-C power adapter. So before we pull into the conclusion, I want to just quickly talk about the prices of both of these models. So as we know, Alienware and Razer, they're both very expensive premium laptops. You can buy cheaper laptops out there, but usually for your price you are getting quite a high-spec, good performing gaming laptop. So with the pricing of both these models, if we start with the base model, the Razer Blade 14 base model comes in at £1,799 in the UK, whereas the X15 comes in at £1,949 in the UK, which is quite surprising. I would have thought the Alienware would have been as cheap or cheaper than this Blade 14, because Razer are notoriously expensive. Don't forget though, this is list price, and you can very often get a discount code for Alienware, which would probably bring it down to similar pricing. Now for the mid-range model, which is the model I would recommend for most people buy, which would be a 3070 for both of these and a QHD screen option for both of these, you're looking at £2,199 for the Blade 14 or £2,499 for the X15. So again, much cheaper on the Blade 14, which is really quite surprising. Now, with price in mind and looking at the performance and all the features that we've seen so far throughout this video, I have to be honest, I've got to give the win here to the Blade 14. The gaming performance was better. The CPU performance was on par or better in most cases. It's a lot more compact. It's got better battery life. It's got a better touchpad. So really in most areas, it's a definite win for the Blade 14. Now don't get me wrong, there are some benefits to the X15. Firstly, you get an extra SSD, which is really handy. So you've got 2 SSD slots on the X15 as opposed to 1 on the Blade 14. Performance on battery was much better with the X15, which might be important to people. And also you're going to get a slightly bigger screen real estate with this model, but obviously it is therefore a little bit more unwieldy. So there we are. I would definitely be picking the Blade 14 over these two, which is quite unusual. Usually I'll normally go for an Alienware, but based on this comparison that we've done so far, I've been so impressed with this Blade 14. What do you think of these two models? Which would you pick between these two? Please let us know in the comment section down below. And as always, thank you for watching.